when people start focusing on the personality, it's usually indicative of the fact that they haven't done the research. That's clear. And if you think about it, when the police start doing the same thing, it's because they don't have enough evidence. So they have to fill in the blanks in the narrative with their perception of one's motivations and personality.
Brian, thank you so much for joining me again.
Hey, always good to be on here.
Yeah, so I don't want to go over your whole background again. If people want to listen to it, they can go to episode 35 or they can go to your website for that. But you have an extensive background in intelligence, investigations, starting with military intelligence is where you started. And then you're a contributor for Daily Clout, and you have your own Substack where you release a bunch of information on there as well. Anything else you want listeners to know without going back?
Just, as a contributor, I have what's on my Substack is done on video on dailyclout.io, and you just look for investigate everything. And I don't have a schedule, unfortunately. I just like to go on there when I've kind of almost completed my initial research on a subject. So if you can hang with that, the information is well sourced.
Awesome. Yeah, I love getting your takes on things because you are so well sourced. You look into things so deeply. And when I approached you for this conversation, you mentioned Luigi Mangione. So we're going to focus on that a bit today. And I went over a lot of your information on that and the stuff you compiled. And it's incredible. We'll also talk about a few other things, the terrorist attacks that we're seeing, things like that. But let's get started with Luigi Mangione. So from the beginning, everything seemed a little off because the Crime Stoppers photos that they used were, you get these partial facial things. And two of them don't match at all. Like there's this one where it's like, it's clearly not Luigi Mangione. Like some of them could be him for sure. Like there's the ones in the hostel. But then there's I think it's the one at Starbucks, that Crime Stoppers photo. I can't convince myself, no matter how hard I try, that is Luigi Mangione. And even the jacket, it's not the same jacket that he's wearing. So unless he's, changing his jacket and changing his eyebrows, it seems highly unlikely that that's him. And that's just the start. There's the whole arrest, everything seems weird. Like the guy, they asked the guy to pull his mask down, Luigi to pull his mask down, and the officer recognized him right away. And based on the stuff that came out, like the pictures, like you get so little of his face in those pictures. How did anyone look at this guy and be like, oh, that's definitely the guy we're looking for based on these Crime Stopper photos? Everything just seems a bit weird here.
Yeah, a bit weird. Definitely to the untrained eye. To me, having done several murder investigations for defense counsels in Virginia, I immediately recognized this sort of pattern with prosecution teams and the police. And this is by no means against the police. They're not the ones who are in charge. They're just told to go do this one thing, and they go and do it. Yeah. But I agree with you. We should really just take it by the numbers. So it's like December 4th at about, I'd say about 9:50-ish a.m. after Brian Thompson was shot in front of the Hilton on 54th and 6th Avenue, the Midtown Hilton. There was a photo release, the one you mentioned, supposedly at a Starbucks. Mm-hmm. And you're right, it's unrecognizable. And anyone who's been to Manhattan ever, like especially in the last 4 years, would know that a guy in a hooded jacket with a mask in Manhattan is about a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
So, and I agree with you. And then you're referring to I guess they got a tip somewhere between the evening of the 4th and 11:50 a.m. on the 5th. The police got a tip that someone matching that description had stayed at the High Hostel at 104th and Amsterdam, way uptown. Well, when you look at those photos, yeah, I think the one in the hostel looks like who we now know to be Luigi Mangione. But to compare that photo to the initial Starbucks photo and or the grainy pictures of some guy in a hoodie on a bike with a black mask, no one's making that connection.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe you said this, that the tip that came in wasn't like, I just saw this guy 5 minutes ago. It was, this guy was at our hostel a few days ago or a week ago. So it's, if you have people coming into a hostel all the time, first of all, the guy's not wearing a mask in the pictures, obviously. But then I've worked at a hotel before, and you're usually not even going to remember people from the day before, let alone several days ago or a week ago. So how does, you see a picture of somebody, it's hard to even place a picture that you're seeing if a person is sitting in a crowd near you at that moment, let alone somebody you saw in passing a few days ago. Granted, maybe the person was like, oh, he's good looking. They recognized him more. They remembered his face a little bit more, but still, it seems improbable that you'd remember somebody from a few days ago based on the pictures that you're seeing in the news. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, let me ask you, because you worked in a hotel.
Yeah.
Now, did you work in a hotel in a busy metropolitan area?
No, it was a fairly small hotel.
Okay, so if a guy or girl walked in a hooded with their hood on with a mask, especially during these last 4 years where everyone in cities is wearing masks, and you're on the 11 p.m. shift, would you look at the Starbucks photo and say, oh, yeah, that's the guy that was here 10 days ago?
No, and I'd worked the night shift when I worked at the hotel. And honestly, like I said, people would check in. I'd forget their faces almost immediately. I mean, you're not even really looking at people's faces when you're checking them in. You're looking at the computer. You're looking at maybe their ID to, verify their information. But it's nothing that you're not investigating anything. You're not looking for a crime or anything. Right. So your senses aren't like alerted. You're not on high alert where you're like, I need to remember this information. So without that kind of that something to make you say, I need to remember this guy, I don't understand why anyone would remember that.
Well, and the thing, you bring up a good point too. So I've done a lot of surveillance, especially in New York City, especially right outside that hotel. That's where a lot of people used to go to cheat on their wives. So, and other things and meetings and everything else. But even if you see, and I'm sure you've run into this, like I would get a picture of a target, right? And when you see that person in person, even if you have like intimate photos from, the wife or the husband or the boss who's investigating his employee, they'll give you good angles. And I always would say, I need a profile, need a front angle, need a down angle, an up angle, whatever you got. And you can look at those photos, but even when you see the person, you're going to be doing this. Because the 2-dimensional versus the reality 3-dimensional, it's a whole different thing. For example, when I met my wife, Naomi, she hired me originally as she had a stalking issue. So she hired me to eliminate that and then also be a bodyguard. It took me 5 minutes of looking around a small coffee shop to figure out which one was Naomi Wolf. And she's a famous person. So that struck me first. But here's another thing, if I may. They had no picture of this person's face. And I was just in Manhattan this past last week. I have family there. We have a house there in Brooklyn, just below Manhattan. And I made a point to really look around and just point my camera around. First of all, every single delivery person wears a black hooded coat and a black mask. Every single men, women, it doesn't matter. And I stopped counting at like 27 in like the first 15 minutes on bikes, mind you. So that right away is a big alert. But the key thing that no one's talking about, and I brought this up in the Substack and I brought it up again in my show, I went back and I listened to the initial 911 call that went out probably, I believe, at about 6:50-ish. And Brian Thompson was shot at 6:44 a.m. on the 4th. The initial 911 call says looking for a male in a cream-colored or green hooded coat with a black mask and black gloves. Well, even I'm looking at my other screener, I'm looking at the shooting, and there's no way you're mistaking a black hoodie. That hooded looks like a Gore-Tex jacket.
Yeah.
Clearly no gloves. You can't see the mask when he shoots. You just see the black mask when they show the Starbucks photo, but there's no gloves, and it's definitely not green or cream colored. But you know what is? What is the initial photos of Luigi Mangione from the hostel, which were taken on November 24th, 10 days prior.
Yeah. It just seems like initially we're getting pictures of two different people. It seems like they unmask, they find the identity of one of them, and they decide that's the guy because we can verify his face now. Not because that's the guy who did it, but because there's two photos and we can figure out the identity of one of the people. But this is out of context at a hostel, not anywhere near the actual crime.
Nowhere near.
And
Nowhere near.
The evidence is kind of lacking other than the supposed evidence that they found on the guy, which is like the homemade gun, his real ID and a fake ID, and then a supposed manifesto that's been released. I can't remember the guy who released it fully, but Ken something. And it just, I would love for you to go into, we're not making the argument or making the case that he's necessarily innocent, but that there's some weird things here and we need justice, not just somebody to go down for what happened, which is how prosecutors can, in my opinion, kind of treat things. Like, we need somebody to hang on the rope here. And it doesn't matter if we have the right guy. Once we have our sights on somebody, we just want to move forward with it. And this is, Bragg's.
You bring up a good point. Sorry. I just wanted, before we get away from the initial topic, on the 911 call, what I'm kind of pointing out here is that I feel that they were identifying the pictures of Luigi Mangione 10 minutes after the murder and not identifying the guy we see in the pictures, which, you know me, I don't make theories. I let the facts lead me, hopefully, to a few hypotheses. But I never start with a theory, and because you'll always run into confirmation bias. But I will say this, it could be darker. I mean, and again, if you have a 911 call that describes a person that you supposedly had never seen until the 5th, there's something going on there.
Yeah.
It's not like they said white male in his 20s. That's pretty broad. They were very specific about the color of his coat, the black gloves, almost like, I mean, hypothetically, like there was a script. I mean, and that sounds crazy, but if you look at the 911 call compared to the first 24 hours of images, the 911 call does not match the person that was on all those Beyond the Lookouts.
Yeah. So, I mean, you said it sounds kind of crazy. Is it crazy though? Like, people get framed for things, like injustices happen and the wrong person goes down for a crime sometimes, whether that be planned or not. Is it crazy? Is it crazy for this to not be as it seems?
It's not. And I'll tell you why, because look who's prosecuting the case. It's Alvin Bragg's office. Yeah. I mean, he did 34 indictments against Trump, but never put those indictments on the indictment sheet. There seems to be a lot of creativity in Alvin Bragg's office. And then at the federal level, where it's coming down from Merrick Garland. Obviously, I don't think really any of their charges stuck except for 1 or 2, and they'll probably all get overturned. But it's not beyond the police to start with a theory or a hunch and fall victims to confirmation bias. So if I tell you, or I'm the commissioner, and I said, we're looking for a guy in a cream colored coat with a hoodie, he's in his 20s, you're going to find a lot of them. If I say, we're looking for this person, you're definitely going to find that person, and you will find evidence to make that person guilty. there's a show called like Making a Murderer, kind of talks about this. And the last case I worked on, they never even looked for a murder weapon. I could get into that later on, but they just looked for this guy, Terry, who was accused of being the murderer by his estranged wife, she was the last person with the victim and had a history of stabbing people, and the police ran after this guy. So people have to realize, like, as good intentioned as some police may be, the machine of policing has really become about numbers and budgets, and they're going to get their numbers one way or another.
Do the police, I mean, I know they do to some degree, but what's the coordination like between media and police? Because it seems like Luigi Mangione is basically being found guilty before he's ever been tried, as far as the media is concerned. And even watching that clip that you shared with Thomas Dickey and the CNN reporter, I don't remember her name, but she was kind of like trying to prosecute the case almost with him, like being like wanting him to answer for Luigi's whereabouts around the time of the murder and stuff like that. And it's like, any journalist would know that he can't answer and shouldn't answer these questions that she's posing. So what's the media's role as far as the investigation and working with the police in these situations?
Well, the media's role should be getting publicly available. Like, the media should not be getting anything we are not getting as a public. And what I've seen, I can speak for the NYPD, is they seem to have they're using the media as a tool. Now, granted, you can use the media to get the word out. Hey, we're looking for this dangerous person. That's totally acceptable. But to use the media to stack a case against the presumption of innocence it certainly goes against the American Bar Association. I was reading about that relationship last night, and they seem to do this, especially with the New York Times, and then especially in New York City, I would say Pix 11 and especially ABC. So that's what I've noticed. And look, I have some personal experience where, someone very close to me, not my wife, had the New York Times show up to their home for a statement before the FBI had called them and in an investigation around politics.
Yeah.
And this person called me and said, hey, why would they show up first? I didn't even know about this until they showed up. And then I got a call from the FBI. I mean, it all worked out, but that is the relationship. And I've had cases where I had a certain Reuters reporter call me about something I never even heard of. And then I had a federal authority call me. And of course I wasn't involved, but there seems to be like they will use the media to try to get additional information prior to having to read those Miranda rights. That's where I've seen it used the most.
Well, there was was it Michael Flynn, or it was somebody kind of connected to Trump who was raided by the FBI, and the news was there before the FBI was there, at the same time. Yeah. It was like New York Times. I can't remember it was Flynn, but it was somebody, I think right after the election of right after Biden's inauguration, somewhere right around that time, I think. And yeah, it was just, why would the reporters know? Like, the FBI shouldn't be coordinating with reporters to give any news outlet a head start on any story, really. But that's kind of what we're seeing.
It happens, but to have them, and I've seen that, like, I think they did that with James O'Keefe as well.
Yeah.
First of all, what it does, it's really killing the presumption of innocence. And it's not a smart move by the prosecution, because it really sets up a case for change of venue, nullification of a jury. These things are not good. But what they're doing, they're also trying to pressure suspects when they see all this media, if they're not seasoned accusees, I don't want to say seasoned criminals, but if they're not used to the media or haven't been around the media, that's scary. You see these headlines with your face all over, and you're like, well, I know I didn't do it, but I better make a deal because there's no way I'm beating this. And that, when you mention the media trying cases, that's exactly what they do. Yeah. Now, in this Mangione case, I don't think we can ignore the fact that United Healthcare is involved. And that is the 5th largest company in the country. And the New York Post, about I think around mid-December, they put out a story about it was revealed after Mangione was extradited from Pennsylvania, where he was caught, to New York City to face those charges. It was put out by the New York Post that they have sources saying United Healthcare had been leaning on the DOJ at the federal, state, and county levels to make sure, their words, that Mangione was made an example of. So you do have, and how's that tie in with the media? Well, I mean, who are the biggest, advertisers? It's healthcare and pharmaceuticals. So of course there's going to be bias there, and I dare I say control over the media by these large companies.
Yeah, and there's you mentioned a guy that's been on multiple news outlets claiming that this is definitely a one-man job and stuff like that, but it doesn't quite align. You go over the footage of the incident and of the murder, and somebody's pressing and holding their brake lights right before the shooting happens, which you said you didn't oversee assassinations or anything, but if you wanted to give a signal to somebody out in the field, that's kind of something that you would be inclined to do. If you needed to signal to somebody without speaking, just push on the brakes, let them know this is the guy to take a picture of, or whatever it might be. And an assassination would work kind of the same way, just with a different outcome, right?
Yeah, exactly. So imagine we have to get. So my type of investigations went beyond just taking pictures of people. We wanted to get people to talk and engage. So I trained my people in social engineering, social hacking, really just good social techniques for getting people to talk to you. And yes, I will admit it, I did use, as one of my training guides, I used to use Neil Strauss's The Game, which is that pickup artist. But there's fundamental principles in there that work to get people to open up to you. So of course we would have to get someone to get to where the target is and find a way to engage with them. Okay. Now, we don't want them to engage with the wrong person. And like I said earlier, you can't always tell from a photo. So we would have a team on the person, the target. We would have a team at the place he's supposed to go, like outside the Hilton, for example. And then we would have the eye, what I call, the person on the ground waiting for this guy to move from one place to another. And they're going to walk pretty close to them, which is easy in New York City because there's a lot of people and no one makes eye contact. Yeah. And when that person would walk in, I'd have a prearranged signal, which actually we used to use the brake light thing, where I'm confirming him just like that, because the guy who's the eye, he can't see his face. So I'm confirming it using my rear view. And I used to have this thing called a cam ranger, where I had this automated like robot tripod, so I could look at it on my phone and control the movements. And I would confirm. I'd say, yeah, that's him. And I just step on the brake lights, or I put on my turning signal, or I put on my hazards. No one's going to think twice about that. And it's a throwback to the old, spy techniques that you'd see in like, any spy movie or manual, where, you put on your hat and, drink your coffee and walk away as a signal, or you tie your shoe. It's the same thing, except it's using a vehicle to mark a target.
Based on what you've seen in this case, how possible is it that the shooter acted alone?
I would say it's impossible. There's no way. It's only happened once to me, where I got to a place where the target would be. And again, as I already said earlier, not for an assassination, for surveillance. But there's only one time in my entire career, my entire adult life, where I got to the place a target would be at the same time the target, or near the same time the target was there. And that was just pure luck. It never happens. Normally you've got to stake a place out all night, sometime for days, before you see a target. Targets change. They change their direction. They might trip. They might meet a pretty lady in the bar. Who knows? they might get killed by someone else. I mean, who knows? So the thing is, to be there right at that time, and not only right at that time, but there's a confidence level we can't ignore here. If I was working alone and I'm the luckiest assassin in the world, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to get there with 10 minutes to spare, I'm certainly not going to stop in a Starbucks for a candy bar and some water. I'm going to have that stuff with me. So that kind of confidence comes from not needing to be there except right at the right moment, because you don't want to be lingering there, even though they're saying he was. You don't want to be. You want it in and out, boom. And then that guy for us, or in special operations, that person comes in and out for a job, and then they're on a plane and they're gone. They're not going to linger around. The team will linger around to do follow-up type stuff. And this even goes with like serving subpoenas. We'd hire a process server. They show up. We're surveilling the target. We're like, there he is. He's in the red coat. Get him. They serve him. They're gone. So there's no way he acted alone, because they have 100% confidence.
Yeah, it seems unlikely if you watch the footage of the guy, of Brian Thompson being assassinated, the shooter is on target, meaning like it's very clear that he's intending to shoot that person. Like he's not randomly killing somebody. He's targeting that specific person. And it just seems really unlikely that if you're targeting somebody, you're just happening across them. Like you have to do something, like you said, to find out their routine. You have to figure this stuff out. And
it's called pattern of life analysis that you do for days prior.
Yeah, and I don't think I haven't heard anything about any evidence about Luigi tailing Brian or finding out his pattern of life or anything like that. And then, as you said, after an operation like that, you would want the person involved to get out of the way. So you're saying you wouldn't have the person go to McDonald's 300 miles away and carry a backpack with all the incriminating evidence the police would need?
I mean, you don't have to be a professional assassin to know that. When I was 6 years old, I knew that from watching, whatever action movie was on. I mean, that was something in our culture we grow up with, is getting rid, never be holding the smoking gun. I mean, and this Luigi Mangione is a very smart, very well-read guy. I've read everything about him I can possibly get my hands on. And it just does not match the profile of someone. Look, you could get scared. Maybe he was, let's hypothesize here. Maybe he forgot it. I mean, I can't think of anything else. And I would think, especially going into, here's another thing. I have to confirm it. I'm going to go down there next week. But I've been to that George Washington Bridge bus terminal where they said they lost sight of him. So now they're saying he went up there, took a taxi after the shooting. And we should get into the taxis a bit later too, because that was a new development after they had Luigi Mangione's face. So I think they had to get the taxi into the story. But that is one of the most heavily police present and Port Authority present terminals on the East Coast. Like they have a police station in that bus station. It's got cameras everywhere. And a lot of that is, following 9/11, protecting the George Washington. They have like quick reaction forces. It's not like, your old Greyhound stations under the bridge. I mean, this is like a pretty state-of-the-art facility. It's almost a mall. Yeah. And they have security there. And I'm pretty sure in a lot of places they do have, they don't wand you like they do at the airport, but they do have scanners and magnetometers and things like that in that bus station. So I'm not buying that they lost him. They had him in a taxi, but they didn't have images of him going into a bus station that they pretty much run.
So this is I saw one taxi image. It was a Crime Stoppers photo, and it's him basically in the back seat of the taxi. Is that the picture you're talking about? That was after the murder?
Yeah. So what happened was this: is initially, and I'm just scrolling up my own Substack here as we're doing this. But so initially, our initial thing that happened was we were told that he took off on an e-bike and then popped out at 86th Street further up north. and then was seen heading back towards the Frederick Douglass houses, which is the kind of Section 8 housing that's pretty close to that hostel.
Yeah.
And then the next day on the 5th, we get pictures of what appears to be Luigi Mangione. We find out his name on the 9th. But we get these pictures of this smiling, handsome guy at a hostel taken 10 days earlier. And then all of a sudden, they have pictures of that guy from the hostel in a taxi.
Mm-hmm.
So now all of a sudden, well, they got a problem. Now they got to get that taxi into the timeline. So suddenly, after 86th Street, he's in a taxi heading to the George Washington bus port. But that wasn't in any of the initial reports. And let me just say this one last thing. If you have a terrorist alert, okay, now people will say, well, they didn't think it was terrorist. Well, they did, because Mayor Adams said right away, we've deployed our homicide investigative units and our terrorist units. That seems like a really weird thing to do for a shooting.
Yeah.
But with that being said, and I have to look into the protocols, one would think they would shut down the bridge access leaving the city, because there's 5-6 bridges. You can lock people into Manhattan if you want to. Okay, Bane did it in the 3rd Batman movie, but you can do that, and it's very. I would think if I were looking for a guy that just executed very brazenly that level of CEO, I would just check all the buses. Like, I don't understand what's going on here. Because let's say they did all this. Let's say he's the shooter, hypothetically. Let's say they just screwed up a lot. Well, is that kind of press really worth the confidence they've lost on this case? They can't catch one guy leaving on a bus, or like even just put out, like, the bus drivers would have gotten an alert. Hey, look for this guy, but they didn't, or they did. And that guy just never got on a bus leaving New York City that day.
Well, I'm looking at this taxi photo, and he's wearing a blue mask, a blue medical mask.
Mm-hmm.
He was supposedly found in Pennsylvania also wearing a blue medical mask, which I know people can change masks. It's not a big deal. But if you have the black mask, looks like a cloth mask, something that you wouldn't throw out.
Like,
so
it looks like a gator. Do you know what a gator is?
Yeah. So if you're wearing that everywhere, I don't know why you would be occasionally wearing medical masks aside from that, but I don't know. But the taxi photo has him in a blue medical mask. So I don't know of any reports of a blue medical mask at the scene of the crime or anything like that with him wearing that, but everything else seems to be a black mask.
I mean, my thing is, it's like, so I used to teach, actually, this is kind of cool. I used to teach when I got out of government service. I still kind of needed some money, so there's always contracts available. Yeah. And one of the things I would do is I was a surveillance team that was trying to track government, like, students, so people becoming case officers or FBI agents. They have a contract where we got to be the people, we got to be the hostile country's, surveillance, and they had a fictitious country overlaid on top of the DC, Virginia, Maryland, tri-metro area. And one thing that these students are taught is to always look for the shoes and the pants to see if it's the same person following you, because you can change the mask, you can change the coat very easily. It's very difficult, however, for us to change our pants and shoes. Yeah. And what was killing me is when Mangione was arrested in Pennsylvania, I really just scrutinized every video to try to see the shoes he was wearing. And because one thing a lot of people, let's say he is a killer, like, I'd love to see the inventory of what really was on him when he got arrested, because I'd love to see the shoes he was wearing.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Last night when I was looking at photos and trying to piece together what I think of this, all the Crime Stopper photos, I noticed that I'm like, I can't see his shoes or his pants in any of these photos, so I can't really look at the shooter, which you can see his shoes pretty clearly. you can't make that connection. You're literally just making it off of that little bit of the face that you can see, and I guess the similarities of the jacket, which should be nothing, because even if it's the exact same jacket, people can have the same jacket. That it's pretty meaningless to me to have that similarity. There's also that difference of the backpack. So you can see Luigi wearing the strap on his backpack is black, and then you look at this the Starbucks photo, and the backpack is not black. It's a light gray. It's very different backpacks. Granted, he could have two backpacks, but my understanding is they found the backpack that the shooter was wearing somewhere a little way from the scene, and there's supposedly Monopoly money in it and a jacket maybe or something like that, from what I read. And it just, I'm like, well, that just seems weird. Like, why would anybody be carrying that around if they're doing that? Like, am I wrong in thinking that if you are going to do an assassination like this, you don't want to be carrying around anything extra? You want to have just what you need, nothing extra, nothing that's going to, granted, it might not weigh him down much, but it's still like, it keeps you from being able to maneuver as well if you need to run. Like, there's reasons not to overload yourself with extra stuff if you're going to carry out any
like
kind of mission.
not having stuff on you that's identifiable when you get caught.
Yeah. With that, okay, we don't know if Luigi is involved in this or not, but if he weren't, why would he be found with all this stuff? Like, why would he be found with a printed gun? Why would he be found with these IDs that supposedly were used at the hostel, and especially this manifesto? What could be the reasons for this? And I mean, can this be staged? Can somebody plant this evidence pretty easily?
Of course. I mean, if you go to the Pennsylvania complaint, which the complaint is what the police officer that arrests him fills out to kind of memorialize the arrest. But the original complaint on December 9th from the Altoona, Pennsylvania police, and I'll just read their words. It said, it contained, at the time, it said, Luigi Mangione, based on Mangione, eventually identifying himself as Luigi Mangione, and also on a real passport found in his possession. Blair County authorities also reported that Luigi Mangione had in his possession the following items: a silver laptop, a backpack, a New Jersey's driver license bearing the name Mark Rosario, a black 3D, and then that's it. That's all that was reported at the McDonald's. Then it says, basically later, after Mangione was arrested and taken to an Altoona Police Department station, a search of the backpack revealed the following items: a black 3D printed pistol and a black silencer, one loaded Glock magazine with 6 9mm full metal jacket rounds, one loose 9mm hollow point round. That's it. What's not mentioned there?
The manifesto isn't mentioned.
Or a notebook.
Yeah.
And I'm reading right from the December 9th police criminal complaint, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus, the name's not even filled out yet. And that was filled out at, the time of the arrest was 9:58. And I'll also state on this that the actual report was submitted and filed at, looks like 1500, which would be 3:00. So hours after. Keep in mind, Mangione was brought to the correctional center after this and then brought back around 4 p.m. But in that complaint, they also say DNA swab, no. Fingerprinted, no. Photographed, no. So all those things had not occurred. So they basically arrested him, and that's fine. You can detain someone based on facial recognition, but to send him up to a correctional center, which obviously that is to try to get one of those jailhouse confessions out of him, without fingerprinting him to verify, like, this isn't his twin brother, his buddy, his cousin that looks like him, taking the fall for him. I mean, that's pretty that's pretty alarming to me that happened.
Yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't seem like he was affording an attorney right away.
Yeah,
Thomas Dickey doesn't seem to have gotten involved until a little while later, and that
right
seems kind
after
of
the
weird.
outburst.
Yeah, yeah, and which is funny because a Gateway pundit called it a violent outburst when he was being brought in. And I'm like, where's the violence? He's just yelling a couple things. There's no violence there. So I thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, I mean, why would, how hard is it? Okay, well, I'm thinking about this. My conspiracy theory brain is thinking about this a little bit. I don't think it'd be that hard. One of the arresting officers was a new officer about 6 months into the job. And I'm thinking if you wanted to frame somebody and you had money and resources, it doesn't seem like it'd be that hard to find a potentially corrupt officer. Not saying this officer was corrupt, I don't know, but somebody involved that would be close by and say, I'm arranging for this guy to be at this location at this time. I need you in the area to arrest him, plant the stuff on him. Is that, I mean, is that just crazy
No,
conspiracy or does that stuff happen?
you bring up an angle I never thought of. I don't think they would need to actually find the corrupt cop. I think because it's NYPD and there is kind of a class order here, your Altoona, your NYPD, big time, small time. I think all NYPD needs to do, or an agent of the FBI, is call Altoona police and several others in that area just to kind of cover their tracks and say, hey, we have intel saying that the shooter from this big homicide is in your area. We also know, according to his, he's probably going to go to a fast food place or a place to get a bite to eat. Well, there's not much in Altoona. So I could see it going out that way, but I never thought of thinking that maybe they made sure he got arrested because they were tracking him or they knew where he was, which kind of, does fill in a blank for me because the story kept changing. First, it was an employee that saw him. Then they interviewed a supposed customer that recognized him. And the employee account was like, he was acting strange. I mean, it's a McDonald's. I mean, how do you act strange? And then they also, then the customer was interviewed and kind of told the same story that supposedly the employee did. But what they didn't cover is that he tried to check into a motel a few hours earlier that day, right down the street. And that seems to have been lost from the major headlines. I've got it, but I don't know why they're not reporting on that more. It just tells me that maybe when he checked into the hotel, he didn't have a backpack or didn't have some of these items. There's just a lot of holes here.
Yeah, and you mentioned that there's no footage of him, or we don't have footage of him in the hostel right before he supposedly left to go commit this murder. And that would be really important information to have, a really important picture, because if him right before he leaves the hostel is dressed exactly like the person who commits the murder, it's like, okay, there's something there to connect that a little bit better to me. But if they have the one photo in the hostel from a few weeks ago, there's no reason that they shouldn't be able to get the photo of right before he left too. I mean, it seems logical to me. So,
especially because you're doing a manhunt and you're calling on the public for help, you would think they'd put out. I mean, the first thing, I've never been a cop, but I would imagine the first thing you do is seize all the footage from the hostel and then kind of scrub it where you need to protect, their proprietary information, what have you, or protect the investigation. But give us a few more angles of this face instead of what we got, one from 10 days earlier. And God knows we don't even know when those taxi photos were taken because there's no timestamp on those. They just kind of cropped it out.
Yeah, a lot of the photos that I found from the Crime Stoppers stuff was all just undated, like they didn't have specific dates, timestamps, anything like that. So it's like you're relying on what they're saying the context of the picture was. You don't actually know for sure. And then, there's something funny about this. There's an irony in this because so many people, he seems to be presumed guilty in the media, and there are these people who feel aligned with the murderer, and they support what he did. And now that Luigi Mangione is identified as the suspect, they kind of fawn over him. But it's ironic because in fawning over him or calling him a hero, they're also presuming him guilty and adding to that narrative. So, like, it seems like Thomas Dickey has a really uphill battle to deal with, because, like, the clips that you shared, it's like they're asking him questions and he's like, we don't even have access to this. All you're doing is relaying what you're hearing in the media, and we have nothing to defend it with because we don't even have this information that you're alleging exists.
Yeah, so, like, Thomas Dickey and the New York team, actually.
Yeah.
And just for clarification, Thomas Dickey, for your audience, is the Pennsylvania lawyer.
Oh, okay.
And then you have the law firm in New York, who's the wife of the guy representing P. Diddy. They tried to make a big deal out of that. But yeah, so there's two teams, and there has to be, just because of jurisdiction. But you're right.
I've seen some people mention the P. Diddy connection with the first attorney in New York. Is there anything there, or is that just?
Well,
I mean, a big attorney represents high-profile cases.
I'm glad you brought this up, and I'm glad we're talking, because honestly, my wife and kids, and even my 13-year-old, they're so sick of hearing about this case, because I have no one to talk to, So I'm like, come on, man. That's the reason why I have podcasts. I think it's more for therapy than anything. Yeah. But you're a researcher, you get a lot of stuff in your head. You got to get it out. But, I think it presents an interesting challenge to Alvin Bragg, and even up to the federal level, because if what we know about P. Diddy is true, meaning he's got dirt on a lot of high-ranking people, especially people in the government of New York, put yourself in Alvin Bragg's shoes. Let's say Alvin Bragg, or someone important to him in his chain of command, was at a P. Diddy party doing bad things. Well, who's going to have that information?
Yeah.
Her husband, the lawyer of Luigi Mangione. So I'm not saying lawyers would do this. It'd be unethical. I am saying things do happen off the books. I could see that. I think that kind of gives Luigi Mangione's New York defense team a lot of perceived power and clout in this case, because how far do you want to push them? How far do you want P. Diddy details to get leaked about members of the New York criminal justice community? So it presents it. I mean, it's a, whether, I don't know if Mangione, it was probably his family, I would guess, or maybe Tom Dickey, the Pennsylvania lawyer, but it's a pretty strategic move if it was planned, because now it takes the whole case. You can't just call this kid guilty, get a crooked jury, and be done with it. There could be some blowback here legally for other cases. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But yeah, I mean, I'm his lawyer seems very ethical. She has no ethical complaints I could find. But if I were her, and I'm not a lawyer, I'd be kind of hinting, like, what do I know? What might come out in this case? Yeah, how far do you want to push me and not give me my not dismiss? Do you want to dismiss this case, or do we blow up this one? How do you want to do this? That's of course, I come from a criminal enterprise of O'Shea's myself, but that's how I think. But I think it does give her a lot of at least perceived clout in this case.
Well, yeah, and having this in Alvin Bragg's jurisdiction is problematic, because I don't know, I don't want to call it precedent, but it's kind of precedent, like, in the media sense. With Trump, when he was being prosecuted by Bragg, there was the presumption of innocence kind of didn't exist there. As far as like commentary around it, I would see people constantly saying, if Trump is innocent, he should get on the stand and prove it. And I'd be like, that's asinine. Even if you're completely innocent, it's extremely dangerous to put yourself on a stand. Like, most defense attorneys will not do that.
Right.
because you just open up the door for more attacks. Like, normally a defendant is not going to state his own case in a trial, but there's this expectation, especially with, Trump, obviously somebody that certain people absolutely hate and think he's the devil and Hitler and all that kind of crap. And they don't want the presumption of innocence there. So I do worry about what's going on in New York, in Bragg's district, especially with how this might be handled. And is that presumption of innocence going to be respected?
It hasn't been respected.
Yeah.
Not at all. The perp walk, the mayor's own comments, and Mangione's own attorney, and saying in the clip, if you don't have it, it's just, there's been no presumption of innocence. And look, I have to say this. Not only has the mayor of New York and Bragg and the Jessica Tisch and everyone involved in this case not presumed innocence, to the point where they're like, the shooter, not the alleged shooter, the shooter, the assassin. Just the mayor being there and just having that perp walk that looked like a scene out of Con Air, or, I mean, you'd think this guy was Hannibal Lecter. I think Victor Boot, the infamous arms dealer, had a smaller entourage than Luigi Mangione. They even had a helicopter parked behind him that is never there. It was a prop. And the only time you're supposed to do something like that legally is if there's a real threat that you are expecting. Now, as far as I can see it, Mangione's not a threat. He's been in their custody for a week, if not more. So what is your threat? Screaming, adoring girl fans? I mean, I don't really understand why they needed 15 A-teams there and a bunch of triple ninjas and the mayor. So that right there is no presumption of innocence. But I have to say this. I'm extremely disappointed with a lot of the pundits I follow on Rumble and conservative podcasters, who I really like, and I still do. But during that case, I could not find many, if any, with the exceptions of Steve Bannon, who really didn't talk about this case too much, just talked about it in an overview. Glenn Greenwald, who was very fair and balanced about this, and Time Magazine. But besides that, and Dan Bongino, okay, and he did the right thing. He said, I'm not going to make any assumptions about this case. I don't know enough about it. We haven't seen all the evidence. And, he's former law enforcement, former Secret Service, so he gets that. But except for him, every single new pundit or conservative pundit, in addition to others, are all saying things like these other people were saying. They're saying, like, well, the reason why he broke, or the reason why he would do this. And it's like, what are you, like, Criminal Minds now? Like, what are you talking about? Like, he's not even in trial. Like, this is sometimes when he was still in Pennsylvania. And I have to warn that those people, and they know who they are, that's bias. Because if you remember the original reports, they were saying, oh, he's a lefty. He's went to an Ivy League school. This is an activist. And I myself had to make an apology on Substack because I got caught up in it. And I was like, a lefty assassin, this country is going to hell. And I wrote a whole Substack called America, Please Accept My Apology, because I realized I had been caught up in it. And people have to be really careful to be objective, especially in these times, because you cannot call for a presumption of innocence of Donald Trump or Daniel Penny, both prosecuted by Alvin Bragg's office. But then because you think this guy has a lifestyle or is rich, or I don't know, but you assume he's a lefty, you throw presumption of innocence out. And as it turns out, he seems to be pretty apolitical. I read everything he's ever written that I could find. And his brother's a Republican delegate. His cousin is a Republican delegate in Baltimore. So when I see that, like, pundits, please, you're not who you are helping. I'm talking to the pundits, not to my good friend Artie here. When you do that, when you say, I think the reason he did it, or the reason he did it, or the reason he broke, you don't know. And when you are just trying to get clicks or just trying to sound knowledgeable without facts, you're actually helping Alvin Bragg, and you're helping a demonstrably corrupt, in my opinion, DA. So stop doing that. You've got to follow the facts. Sorry. I'm very passionate about that.
No, I appreciate it. And I think this is actually a broader problem in our political dialogue as a nation right now, is that and Trump actually plays into this a bit too. We're obsessed with personality. It's what we focus on, and people analyze politics by believing that they understand somebody's personality enough that they understand the underlying reasons why decisions are made or why things are done. Mm-hmm. You see it with Trump constantly. Some people that support him and some people that hate him. It's like, Trump did this because he is a selfish person who only thinks about, like you see it all the time. And people, they want to assume things about a personality. So I think Luigi Mangione comes along. People skip right past the is he actually guilty part and go to, okay, I'm told this is the guy. I'm going to start reading into his personality and work backwards, which doesn't make sense. Like you have to go back and actually piece together and like question the narrative from the beginning, not just, oh, this is what I'm told. This is the guy. Okay, now let me start connecting the dots that haven't already been connected for me.
Confirmation bias, man. It's a disease. It really is. And you make a good point, because if I may, when people start focusing on the personality, it's usually indicative of the fact that they haven't done the research. That's clear. And if you think about it, when the police start doing the same thing, it's because they don't have enough evidence. So they have to fill in the blanks in the narrative with their perception of one's motivations and personality. And as we've seen from the start of this, they've been wrong every time. They first thought it was a guy who didn't get healthcare coverage. Well, this guy's rich and he's in the healthcare industry and he's never been a United Healthcare customer. Yeah. So that theory went out the window. So when people of any political persuasion start trying to play psychologist, well, what they're doing is, in this case, in particular, they're kind of amplifying what the prosecution here needs them to amplify. And I've seen this. It's not unique. Every time a prosecution team starts focusing on the personality, any good defense lawyer is going to object to that in court, saying you are not a psychologist. That's why they have to bring in psychologists. But they're just playing into the narrative. So anytime the intangibles are presented in a system that relies on tangibles, that being the criminal justice system, with the exception maybe of motivation, anytime they start relying on he was very mean, or like you said, he's a liar, or he's selfish, or he was angry, you don't know what he was. And it's not going to move the needle on a case at all in a fair system. So it's interesting you brought that up, because pay attention to this. I mean, the right accuses the left of this all the time. They're like, facts over feelings, right? We've heard that a million times. Yet all of a sudden, a lot of people on the right are speaking with their feelings over facts, and they have to, I don't know, maybe they got better over the holiday break and got their objectivity back, but it takes discipline and people have to do it. And, if they have a producer or a sponsor saying, hey, say this, they don't belong in, and they're saying it, they don't belong in the media business.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a common human problem, right? We all, it's easy to look outward and see, oh, all these people aren't objective, but it's much harder for, especially people who I think have an audience and are less likely to be self-reflective. And there's kind of a consistency principle that works here psychologically, where like if you keep making statements and presenting yourself a certain way, you want to be consistent with that. So I think people can overlook their own lack of objectivity quite easy and see that lack of objectivity in other people way before they see it in themselves. So that's a big problem. And
a lot of them don't do their own research either. I mean, as this new media grows, we're going to see that more and more. And if you're not doing your own research, you're giving a fact sheet, you got an hour to prepare, you're going to say those things. You're going to say, And I had to go back, and because in my rush to get out sourced information, but you still have to write it. I had to go back and double check, like, did I say alleged? Did I say this? Did I? And it just, honestly, it just takes practice. And that's why, I always tell people, I'm like, write your timeline, start your timeline. If you do a timeline with all the facts you can squeeze in there, things will become clear to you, but it forces the feelings out because there are no feelings in timelines. You don't feel that you were wanting to be at a certain location. You were there or you weren't, or they were there or they weren't. And so I always tell people, collect, read, then before you even analyze, put everything in date-time group order.
Yeah. Yeah, you bring up a good point. We're not going to get into it too much, but with new media, there is this kind of thing that people aren't addressing too much. Is the new media, we're trying to break free from corporate media, but then corporate media is actually like the backbone of like most of the information that's coming out of new media. So it's pretty problematic because it's like you're actually feeding the old bias into the new system that we're
that is really well put. Yeah. Well observed too.
And you mentioned Mangione's wealth, and that's something that I was thinking about last night, because I'm like, let's forget that he was never a customer of United Healthcare and pretend that he was, and he was wronged by them at some point. My understanding is United Healthcare, Brian Thompson implemented an AI system that had like a 90, it was inaccurate, but it kept denying claims, and it had like a 90. I don't know if this is true, but it supposedly there was an AI system that was implemented, and it was denying claims like crazy. And to me, it seems like if you're somebody with the means, granted, United Healthcare is a massive company, you have the means to actually address this through civil or criminal lawsuits, because if they're using AI, which is a fairly new technology, you're exposing health records to AI, potentially violating privacy acts. You are doing some stuff that could very well be prosecuted in a criminal court, and if not a criminal court, then a civil court. If you have those means, that seems like where you're going to go before you decide to become an assassin. It just seems like that would be the course of action for somebody who, especially who's intelligent. The guy seems smarter than me, and these are the thoughts going on in my head. It's like, why wouldn't you address this in the court system and try to make some real change? Because I don't think assassinating the guy, it's still business as usual at United Healthcare, I'm sure. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it made me think of something while you were mentioning that. And, we have to consider class here, social class. Okay. Yeah. And it is, let me back up and say, there's a really great book by a guy named Paul Fussell, and it is called Class, A Guide Through the American Class System. And there are certain traits that different social classes have. Okay. And that is, like, for instance, I come from a working class background, big Irish family. I grew up with a father who would settle things with his fists. Quick, not with us, but like with, he was, we're proud of him. We're like, yeah, dad's going to beat that guy up. My dad's tougher than your dad type deal. But, you take someone like my wife, Naomi, she comes from a whole different social class than I do, where they always go to the lawyer. They always take the legal route. They always get that. Well, they used to get that second opinion from the doctor. They will always research and try to work within the community laws and norms. This to assassinate someone, it just does. Unless someone had a complete break, but then really, there's no evidence of that here. This is not, but if I was going to take, let me try to land this plane. If I were to take a typical person from his social class, highly educated, legacy money, comes from a legacy family of immigrants, it's a very American story. it's unlikely that this person would skip all the things you mentioned and go right to the assassination. I could see it happening if his family lost all their money and United Healthcare took it all and their family business collapsed and he has no future and his mom's dying or something. Then I could see it. But to go right to this,
Yeah.
this is not a stupid guy. And this is a very self-reflecting type person, according to the podcast he's been on and his own writings, not the manifesto. I believe that's probably not even his own writing. But this is a guy that was dedicated to self-improvement, and to be dedicated to self-improvement, one has to be very self-facing, self-reflective. What can I do better? How can I have done that better? And this is very typical in the type of books that are on those book lists, and I read them all too. You're always doing that self-improvement thing. So you're self-reflecting. To go right to the violence, right to murder, that's something that just doesn't typically happen. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I'm saying it's out of character, I would say, for someone like this guy, the profile of a guy like this.
Yeah, and the class thing is a really important thing you brought up because, if somebody is lower middle class and talking to a few attorneys, which is going to cost you a few $1,000s, it's cost prohibitive. It's going to cost you some money. If those aren't even options for you, I can see you skipping that, going to desperation and wanting to kill somebody. But if you have the resources, it seems asinine that somebody wouldn't explore that. An intelligent person is going to look at the legal route and say, these people, this company is screwing people over in this way. What are the ways we can screw them over legally? Like, you're gonna have so much more change caused on that too. More publicity. I mean, this is a lot of publicity, but you can keep doing, like, you can go after Brian Thompson and United Healthcare. Then you can go after another company if that works. Like, you have more options versus anyone with half a brain knows that if you kill somebody, you're on the run. And as soon as you get caught, whatever, even if you believe you're doing it for just reasons, like, your run is over. You don't have any more options after that. So,
yeah, these things are all things I'm thinking about, not really focusing on the investigation. Because with this one, I'm trying to keep it more like what a defense team would need to use. But I agree with you, because it does talk to that big gap in the prosecution's case, and that is motive.
yeah.
And right now, as hard as they're trying, they just don't have it. They've got maybe time and opportunity if they can actually place Mangione in New York City, which I haven't seen any evidence that they can place him in there on the day of the shooting.
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything. But they also have a motive problem. There's no conceivable motive here.
Yeah. Yeah. Even if they found out that Mangione was in New York at the hostel and even went to, I think it's Midtown is the area that Brian Thompson was killed. Even if he was in that same area at the same time, there's millions of people in New York. That doesn't really tell you
for bringing that up. I almost forgot. It was the day of the tree lighting in Rockefeller Center. I mean, it's just, there's so many, and there's actually, I played this as an outro and just let it run for like an hour on one of my shows. But a lot of people just do these long streams of just videotaping their walk through New York.
Yeah.
It's like a new type of thing, I guess. But one had a nice wide angle lens, and they're walking through all those areas. And keep in mind that the Hilton is 300 yards away from the tree lighting, and probably one of the most frequented hotels by tourists because it's a trusted brand. They're decent, not great, but decent hotels. And so there's so many people. And I was watching it for a while, and my son was watching it because he really was trying to urge me off the computer so we could go watch football. But I said, okay, while you're sitting here, just count people that match that description that you see in the picture. And he's like, okay. He just kept counting. He's like, they all look like this guy. They all look like him, and I want to talk too about the the evidence that was supposedly found. And I'll urge everyone, if you want to start really researching like a defense team's investigator, everything matters. Okay, they don't care about your theories. They don't care about what ifs. They care about facts. And some of those facts include what the prosecution, what the affidavits that the police fill out say, what the official statements say verbatim. And the initial press release or the press conference, a bottle was found at the scene. Bullets were found at the scene. Granola bar wrappers were found at the scene. That has now changed to near the scene. And in some cases, they've said found outside the Starbucks. So to me, it seems like, if I was a defense, I'd be saying, which is it? What's near? What's at? Where'd you find this stuff? Where's the affidavits?
When did they find it, Because if it was found right after the shooting, that's one thing. But if it's a week later, you're scouring a big area for evidence, it's quite possible that Luigi Mangione just walked through that area and discarded a granola wrapper,
Very likely. And not only that, did they check the cameras inside the Hilton? Because I'm pretty sure Hilton has a contract with Starbucks. So I'm sure there's probably a Starbucks in there. There's also 5 Starbucks around that area.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. If you're from out of town, it's just normal to go to a trusted brand for your coffee and everything. There's not a lot of adventurous people out there who want to go to, the back alley, coffee shop from this little wizened man who brought his beans all the way from South America. No, you're going to want to go to the trusted brand because you know what you're going to get. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a million candy bar wrappers. There's a million, and you're right. That's such a touristy area. When do they take out their garbage? When, how about the cameras outside that Starbucks? There's a bank right across from it.
Yeah.
Where are those photos? How come we only have very, very, that's a different topic, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. And speaking of evidence, the other thing that's changed is the bullet casings. Okay. First they said it was a Sharpie where they wrote the depose, defend, or depose, defend, delay. Then it was, so did you hear about that part?
Yeah.
Okay. So
I don't know about the changes in this.
So it started with a Sharpie. First they said written, then they said written with a Sharpie. These are the official press conferences or press releases by the police. Then it became engraved. And I want to think that I had something to do with that because I took my Glock, and it's a bigger round. So I can show you here. Don't worry, it's safe. But if you look at a typical round, right? And just, that's about the size of a quarter for people that I don't have a quarter, but you can see it there. So I tried forever to take a Sharpie and write just one word or all three on one of these. Okay. It's impossible to keep it on because you rub it off, even with the Sharpie. Even if you let it sit there for an hour to set in, it's not setting in on polished brass.
Yeah, you can't get a Sharpie to stick on anything polished, any kind of metal that's polished. So
and certainly not to be legible. And when I zoomed in on those bullet casings they had at the scene, because one thing I do, and I always try to give advice, hope you don't mind me doing it on your show, but if people want to investigate, collect before you do anything. Don't go down rabbit holes, just turn on the vacuum. And that's what I do. I just record the screen and just keep scrolling through newscasts because you get a lot of good footage that way. But there's no writing on those casings that I saw. Yeah. We know there's only going to be at total 6 because there's one shot, one discarded, one shot, one discarded, one shot, one discarded, maybe 7. And I didn't see any writing on those. So I don't I don't know why they did that. I think they were trying to build on their initial theory, the police, of this being a disgruntled customer, and now they're kind of stuck with that. Now they've got to really have their due diligence on that because that defense team is going to tear that apart. And all they need to get to is reasonable doubt. I think they have it right now. But I did put out a video of me trying my damnedest to get that writing on. Then I actually shot it out my back door. Don't worry, that's up in the woods, not in this suburban area. But I could not, no matter how careful I was, I even used tweezers, I could not keep enough of that Sharpie written on that bullet to be even legible as a word.
When it goes to the barrel, it smudges, I'm assuming, right?
Not necessarily, because it's
just the beginning. You can't even get it from the very beginning on there.
Yeah, I mean, the casing will eject, so it's not going to go through the barrel. But
sorry,
no, that's okay. But the only way, see, the problem is this: is like you could put it in the you could put it in the magazine, and then write it on there. But then you still have to get another bullet on top of that, which is going to smudge. If you use a speed loader, which is a device that presses it down, you might have some success, but these things are, I mean, as you can see, they're pretty snugly in there. I mean, let me just, so you see that one right underneath. So they're pretty snugly in there. They're going to smudge. It's just impossible. So I did notice they changed that to engraved. They engraved it.
It seems like it's time to engrave.
But not only that, if you're making a bold statement like this assassination organically did, why not just drop a sign on the guy? I mean, you took the time to reload and walk, not run. Why would you hide your message on a tiny little, and those are 40 caliber rounds. 9mm rounds are a bit smaller. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't seem like a good way to get your message across.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're somebody who's already written a manifesto. I mean, that manifesto that they supposedly found is written by somebody. If it's written by anybody actually involved, it's written by somebody expecting to get caught eventually. So if you're at the point of writing a manifesto and assassinating somebody, like you said, why wouldn't you just do something, leave a message there, like other than on the bullets, which...
Yeah, why didn't he leave the manifesto on the body?
Yeah.
If he planned it so well. And that's another thing. Well, I shouldn't lead your show. I'm sorry. It's just, but we should definitely talk about the announcement of that conference, that investors conference.
Something, I think a lot of people understand this, but not everybody. We have this court system in the United States, presumption of innocence, and we want justice to prevail. But I think some people don't understand the role of prosecutors in that. Some people think maybe prosecutors are trying to find the truth, but the reality is prosecutors are trying to win. And that's something that a lot of people might not understand fully, because we have this system that justice is supposed to prevail. I think it's easy to assume that the prosecutors want justice, but prosecutors want to win just like any other attorney. And whatever case gets put in front of them, they're going to try to win that. Yeah. There's examples of this, even prosecutors knowing they have a bad case, still prosecuting that and trying to win as best as they can.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up. I have a great, if I may, I wanted to read some of this to you. If I know we're running out of time, but I think it makes your point beautifully. And I'll send you the article. This is a case I actually worked, right? So I won't read the whole article, but this is a case, 2017, where this guy named, Clarence Terry was accused of killing a guy named Shaquille Baldone in Alexandria, Virginia. And the jury was unable to reach a verdict in the murder of Shaquille. But some of the things that the prosecution said in this was like, so, I mean, they had this case, right? And the police ran with it. This guy gets stabbed. He's walking with Pamela Calloway Terry, who's the estranged wife of the accused. Shaquille's walking with her, and then Shaquille's dead. Shaquille's a big guy. He's like 6'4". He dies of a stab wound right through the heart. No defense wounds. So someone had to get up pretty close to him.
Yeah.
Pamela has a history of stabbing people, including Clarence, her estranged husband, hence the reason he's probably estranged. So if you listen to this, they get these cases, they run with them, and they always make the mistake of going public because they want to show the public we're doing something.
Yeah.
Just like in this case, Alvin Bragg has egg on his face from Trump. He's got it from the Daniel Penny case. He's 0 for 2 at that point. So there's some pressure. And in this case here, like, just listen to this paragraph, and this will sound very familiar. And this is Commonwealth of Virginia. The crucial witness to the murder was Pamela Calloway Terry, who testified that Clarence Terry committed the murder. But both the prosecution and the defense acknowledged she had lied to the police throughout the investigation. The distance between Pamela Calloway and the murder changed, with her at first being nearly a block away from the murder to being right next to Baldone when it happened. Police never even found a murder weapon. This is all in the article. I'll send it to you. But they still... So we got them. We had a hung jury. They could not decide. And I'm thinking, thank God this guy's free. And, Michael Hadid was the lead attorney on that one. And then Rami Babari, who's actually with the Commonwealth's attorney office, which is like a DA down there. He's now with them. They both did an excellent job. I was out there collecting evidence, and I discovered they never looked for a murder weapon. And it's hard for the public to understand, because when you get a murder case, when you're on a murder case, you do get stuff the public doesn't see. The surveillance doesn't always help. It rarely does. But the most helpful thing in there is the affidavits filled out by the police, because every single person you see on those videos, like of this Brian Thompson case, is going to fill out an affidavit. So an affidavit is just recording everything that happened as you process a scene. So if you are a patrolman and you're guarding the murder scene, if someone comes up and talks to you, you have to do an affidavit. Yeah. You have to do an affidavit for when you get there. You have to do an affidavit for what you saw when you got on the scene. Every single person does. And it's mountains of documents to read through, because everyone's doing an affidavit. If you talk to a witness, you do an affidavit, then you have that witness fill out an affidavit. Sometimes the police will do this on purpose. They bring out everyone because everyone has to do an affidavit. That's more stuff for the defense to get through.
Yeah.
But what you do find in those affidavits, it's a true case of the devil in the details, because if it's a BS case, like the Terry case was, you find a lot of contradictions, because not everyone's read on to the plan. And one guy's like, well, I went in to Pamela, her house, and I did notice that someone had just got out of the shower, and there were things that looked like blood stains on the wall and blood stains on the clothes, but that's it. It's, those kind of things. And I'm reading this and I'm shocked. I'm shocked because I'm like, wait, you went to who should have been the prime witness's house as a patrolman, and you saw what looked like blood. You didn't, and they never even ran her DNA. They took DNA, they just never ran it. So they do play these games, but with all of that against them, this guy still spent another year in jail, and they had to go back to court, and we eventually got the case dismissed completely, because at that point, but even though they knew, I mean, I got her to go to the grand jury and admit that she actually had a knife on her, the night of the murder. And I did that by saying, hey, you know what? This is Brian O'Shea, and I did this with permission. I said, well, I went through a dumpster and I found, turns out I have a murder weapon, a potential murder weapon. And she's like, I don't have to talk to you. And I said, no, you don't. But you might want to talk to the grand jury. That's all I said. Now, if you think about what I said, it's totally legal. I said, I went through a dumpster and I have a potential murder weapon. We all have a potential murder weapon. We've all gone through a dumpster. I didn't say I went through that dumpster and found, but I was playing on the fact that I thought she was hiding that. She did. She went to the grand jury and said, hey, by the way, left out this key detail. I had a knife in my purse that night. I forgot to tell you. So, but even with all that, prosecutors will still push and push and push, because they're getting pressure saying, hey, we've spent hundreds of thousands on this case. Yeah. We cannot afford to have another case go south like this. That's what happens here. In my opinion, they're stuck. They are going to drive this pony all the way to the finish line, whether they win or lose, even though they know they're going to lose. And just yesterday, there's now a delay for the indictment hearing, which says a lot. Could mean anything, but it was brought by the prosecution. They asked for a delay. Even though they said that we get mountains of evidence, this guy's guilty as hell. I think they got a problem. And I think they're trying to build a motive because TMZ just magically happened to find 2 German tourists who were with Mangione in Thailand who said, oh, yes, he went to a shooting range while in Thailand.
Interesting.
Like, first of all, you got to ask why? Yeah. Oh, because he was preparing for the murder. So he went to Thailand?
Yeah. Yeah. The things aren't adding up. And you know what you're saying about prosecutors? I've heard stories about prosecutors turning a blind eye to new evidence that exculpates. Did I use that word right? Say that word right? That prove or cast doubt on the guilt of the person who they have in their crosshairs, and they kind of turn a blind eye to that because, I mean, they don't want their case to unravel, so they have to just ignore it, which I think is very unethical. Like, a prosecutor should take whatever's put in front of them and factor that in. But I've heard of cases where they just ignore it because they already have their sights on somebody. They don't want to take in new information. There's multiple examples of stuff like this. So
it's every case I've worked on.
Yeah.
It's like, I was naive. The first one I did, I'm like, boom, got him. Yeah. And I'm not some super talented investigator here. It's just if you make a timeline and check every inch of a crime scene and go through every word of every document associated with that crime, it might take a long time and it's hard work, but you'll find what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And I was shocked. I mean, the first case I did, I'm like, got them dead to rights. I can throw this out. We're the heroes. Oh, no. Never happens. They will still say, well, we still think he did it. I'm like, but she just admitted she did it, or he just admitted he did it. And we have a video of him doing it with 3 other guys. We have video of him in Hawaii at the time. There's no way he could have done it unless he has magical powers. And they'll still be like, we're moving forward.
Yeah. 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 There's one thing about this, and I know you don't like to speculate, but the question everybody has when some doubt is cast on this case is, well, then what's going on? Why is Luigi Mangione, assuming that he might not be guilty, if he weren't guilty, why is he the guy that is in the news? Why is he the guy in handcuffs in jail? Why him? And why did this all happen? Like, there's so many questions there that people have when you present them with, well, I don't know if he's guilty. Like, then why is this all happening?
Why is he in the mix?
Yeah.
Well, I will speculate. I mean, you got to speculate a little just to, once you're done running down your leads, you got to kind of speculate to figure out which direction to go in. And I am at that point where, how did he get in the mix? So I would say this, where my mind goes is never assume everything's intertwined. Okay. Never assume that there's an association between, the Mangione family and Brian Thompson or the senior execs at United Healthcare. They really barely interacted with them except in official capacities, and they had a board and a CEO and everything like that. But think about this. I mean, if you want to speculate, okay, think about motive. We can go over motive of who would want Brian Thompson dead. No one seems to be addressing that. But let's think about who would have motive to see Mangione go down. Okay. The only motive I could find out, let's hypothesize and say someone set him up. I mean, he got in the mix somehow. Mm-hmm. Could be by chance. They were looking for a guy in a hood. They found a guy in a hood in their database because his mom had reported him missing, but he wasn't in a hood, I don't think, in those photos. But anyways, but who would have the motivation? What would motivate someone to frame Luigi Mangione? The only thing I can think of is, according to the New York Post, he was heir to a pretty sizable payout upon his grandmother's death, with the stipulation that you don't get the money if you're accused of a drug crime or a felony, according to them. I don't know if that's confirmed or not. So if that is true, Well, I would say everyone who would increase what they inherit by having one man down would have a motivation. And who knows? I mean, could
Yeah.
be a family member saying, hey, you know what? If this guy, if, let's set up Luigi. But then again, the problem with that is it seems like the police even had foreknowledge of Luigi based on the cream colored coat and getting the photo of the hostel out so quickly. Mayor Adams kind of slipping on the 4th and saying, we've decided to release additional photos. I think that was a slip. Deploying the terrorist team for a shooting. So I feel like Brian Thompson was marked for assassination, and how, I mean, there's crossover that I can't connect here. Like, it could have been totally like the family said, hey, he did it, because the mother did say, I could see him doing something like that, according to the FBI in San Francisco. So who knows? But maybe it's two parallel things where, like, you got one plot over here where someone in the family wants Luigi out because it increases the inheritance, because you don't have to split it as many ways. This murder pops up, they turn in Luigi.
Yeah.
That's all I could think of on that one.
Yeah. I appreciate that take. You brought up terrorists. They were kind of looking at it as potential terrorists at first. And I know you don't have much time, but I want to just bring up what happened in New Orleans on New Year's Eve, and this interview that Sarah Adams did with Sean Ryan in December, and she kind of predicted that we're going to see terrorist attacks in 2025. And on top of that, there's also another Sean Ryan where this guy who blew up a Tesla in front of Trump Tower, or not Trump Tower, Trump Hotel in Las Vegas, supposedly had a manifesto or something he sent to a journalist, and it has some accusations in there for the administration, Trump's administration, stuff like that. How should people be analyzing this stuff as it's coming in?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because I saw the interview, and I hadn't looked too much into that case. I think the two cases are unrelated.
Yeah.
People have made, addressing that, I would say to people, not to promote my brand, but you do have to investigate everything. Like, people are saying, oh, they're connected because they were both at Fort Liberty, which used to be Fort Bragg.
Which is huge.
It's massive.
Yeah.
It's massive.
Yeah.
Like, I've spent years, I was in the military for 11 years. I spent years at like Fort Campbell or Fort Lewis. And I maybe have probably met less than 2% of the people on that base. Are gigantic. And they're totally different units. One's special forces, which is a whole different command, and one's regular army. And one got out like back in 2015, totally different job. Unlikely they knew each other at all. So I think they're not connected. As far as the manifesto, I mean, that's tough, because it's not really a manifesto. It seemed more like a, hey, get me on your show thing before I do what I'm going to do.
Because he's making claims about the drones being like, I can't remember what it, like, anti-grav.
Yeah, it seemed really convenient that he addressed every topic to put them to bed. And the other thing that's weird about it is, like, he's a special forces trained guy. So these are 12-man teams. There's different specialties on these teams. There's weapons experts, 2 weapons experts, 2 like first aid or like paramedic experts, 2 engineers, which blow things up or build things, communication. So there's like, I think 5 different disciplines, and it's a total of a 12-man team. But all these guys know how to blow things up effectively. I mean, I was in a special forces unit. I wasn't a Green Beret, but I was in the intelligence detachment. But we went to all the ranges. We got a lot of the training. I mean, we used to, for fun, daisy chain Claymore mines and C4 together and see how big of an explosion we can make just at the end of the fiscal year, because you got to blow all that stuff up anyways. But he would know better to use Coleman camping fuel and some what looked like bottle rockets. I mean, that was a display.
Yeah.
And he would also know better not to use a Tesla because it's not going to blow up. You might want to use like an old Datsun or a Duster or some piece of crap or some new car, that's made of fiberglass. So obviously that is very performative. I'll say that is very performative. And
when there's speculation that he didn't want to kill people, that's what they were speculating on Sean Ryan's show when they were having that discussion, is maybe he didn't want to kill anyone. Maybe he just wanted to make a statement or something.
Yeah, I mean, Tesla in front of Trump Tower, I think the statement's pretty clear. I don't know exactly the details of that, but I agree with the analysis I saw on that show of like, look, obviously he didn't want to cause mass damage because he easily could have. And it's not hyperbole. It's not only are these guys well trained, but they do this every day. The difference between regular army and special forces units, a lot of that is range time, including, hands-on explosives, that sort of thing. Whereas the regular army may throw a grenade in basic training. We could throw them every week, where the regular army maybe goes to the range once a quarter. We can go every day if we want to, because we have a bigger budget, more bullets, more people to run a range who are qualified to run a range. So it's almost second nature to do things correctly. So he would actually have to think about how to make this not be a fatal bomb. It'd be more instinct to make it a fatal one.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what comes out over the coming weeks about that and what we see. Hopefully there's no more terrorist attacks. There's a lot of stuff going on. Seeing the drone activity starting right after the election was kind of weird. And this is the last.
Isn't it weird that it stopped and then they had these two
Yeah.
incidents? Like it just stopped.
Yeah.
And then all this happens.
The last thing I want to ask you about is just kind of for my own sake. We saw an election, Trump won handily, and I think a lot of people have this feeling like it seems too easy. After all the hell they put Trump through over the last 8 years, they try to put him in jail. They try to impeach him. They tried to assassinate him twice. I don't know who they is necessarily because it's we could be talking about different groups here and it's ambiguous, but it just seems too easy. I want to see a peaceful transfer of power. I know Biden's making that difficult as far as what Trump can do in his term, but I still just want to see a peaceful transfer of power. I saw news the other day that Trump is having a rally in DC on the 19th. And I mean, as long as this is true, it worries me because I'm like, why would he put his neck out there the day before inauguration? And maybe the news of the rally isn't true, but I saw this in several news outlets, so I would imagine it was verified. But yeah, like, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, why would he do a rally the day before? It seems like get in there and then celebrate,
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, if it is true, and I haven't seen that, but let's say it is true. Keep in mind that after, the the Pennsylvania attempt.
Butler. Yeah.
Butler, thank you. He did up his security, and his security is mainly tier 1 operators, which means like kind of like Delta Force or Black Ops level guys. Like these are beyond Green Berets. These are hunters. These are the kind of people that they try to portray on shows like Lioness and stuff like that. And I've known these guys you wouldn't know them from Jack on the Street, but they're really good. But their defense is an offense. So if that's his team, and he has great intelligence people around him as well, and he has a lot of supporters in and out of the active intelligence and law enforcement world. There's a lot of people that support Trump that people don't even know they support Trump. But I could see him setting up a trap. That's all I could guess.
Yeah.
Can you imagine they just have to catch one undercover FBI guy and they blow open the entire 2020 case?
Yeah.
It wouldn't take much. So that's the only motivation I could see is like kind of like a trap, for them. And I don't think they're stupid on the left, but I think they are blinded by hubris. I could see them walking into it.
before we wrap up, since you mentioned a TV show, the only thing I want to ask you is, being in the intelligence world, are there any TV shows or movies that like hit and it's like, that's real, like that's how it really is?
Let me be careful the way I say this. I can't answer that question. I can say my favorite movie about the reality of the intelligence community, in particular the CIA, would be Spy Game with Robert Redford and Brad Pitt.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, Brian, it's been awesome talking to you. I really appreciate your time. Your work is so valuable and I gained so much from it. Before we wrap up, again, I want to just offer it to you to share anything you want and just tell listeners where they can find your Substack, where they can find you on Rumble, YouTube. I know you're going to Rumble exclusively eventually. Or at least leaving YouTube. But yeah, tell listeners where they can find you and all that.
Well, YouTube keeps, kicking me off, so I probably will have to. Yeah, you can find me on X at Brian O'Shea. That's BrianOshea like spy. That was the acronym for my old firm. So Brian O'Shea, SPI on X. It is the same thing on Instagram. It's just Brian O'Shea on Getter. And go to dailyclout.io and look for Investigate Everything with Brian O'Shea and my Substack, which is brianoshea.substack.com. And the newsletter is called Investigate Everything. I try to post as soon as I get done with every single report, but sometimes there's gaps because I want to make sure they're complete. So find me there and, do support me and podcasts like this. This is a very important podcast. I love these long forms. It's great to really process this stuff with you.
Yeah. Awesome. Brian, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you again.
Always a pleasure. Thanks.